You are a cancer in this house. Jessica Whitmore's scream made all 12 employees of the mansion freeze in place. Rose Miller, kneeling beside Mrs. Caroline's wheelchair, felt her whole body tremble. 5 years caring for that elderly woman as if she were her own mother, 5 years enduring daily humiliations, and now this. In the next 24 hours, a truth buried for nearly 40 years would explode like a bomb, destroying everything Jessica believed about her family. The Whitmore mansion's living room looked like an inquisition court. Jessica stood planted at the center, her $20,000 black suit immaculate, brutally contrasting with Rose's worn white uniform. Around them, the staff formed an involuntary circle. Teresa, the cook who had been with the family for 20 years, clutched a dish towel tightly. Samuel, the driver, stopped mid-step carrying the groceries. Even Dr. Andrew Clark, who came for Mrs. Caroline's weekly checkup, remained frozen with the stethoscope around his neck. Rose had arrived at that house on a suffocating January afternoon 5 years earlier. Mrs. Caroline had just suffered her second stroke. The family urgently needed a caregiver with experience in elderly patients with reduced mobility. Rose had all the qualifications: years of practice, impeccable letters of recommendation. "Let me make something clear from the start," Jessica had said during their first meeting, looking Rose up and down as if inspecting cattle at an auction. "My mother is a woman of class. I don't tolerate sloppiness. I don't accept familiarity. You are an employee, not a friend. Salary: $1,800, 1 day off per month." Rose accepted. She had no choice. What she didn't imagine was that every day would become its own private hell. Jessica found flaws in everything. The temperature of Mrs. Caroline's bath was always wrong, even with a thermometer. The medicine was given at the incorrect times, even with programmed alarms. The food was inadequate, even when following the doctor's prescribed diet. "Rose, you smell like poverty," Jessica said, once at a birthday party in front of 30 guests. Everyone laughed. "Please, use more deodorant before walking among the visitors." Another time, Jessica threw away the lunch Rose had brought from home. "Poor people's food in my fridge. Disgusting. Eat what's left over from dinner, if there is any." But there was something that kept Rose there, beyond financial need. In her moments of mental clarity, Mrs. Caroline would squeeze her hand and say strange things. "You have his eyes," she once whispered, "the same brown eyes with golden flecks." Rose never understood, but she kept those words in her heart. During those 5 years, Rose saved Mrs. Caroline's life 3 times. The first was recognizing signs of a pulmonary embolism that the doctors had overlooked. The second was noticing an accidental overdose of medication that Jessica had given incorrectly. The third was performing the Heimlich maneuver when the elderly woman choked alone in her room at 3 in the morning. The explosion happened on a sunny Thursday. Jessica stormed into the room during the staff's breakfast, holding an empty jewelry box. "Who stole my mother's emerald brooch?" Her voice dripped with venom. $120,000, a 3-generation heirloom. The silence was immediate. Teresa froze mid-sip of her coffee. Samuel choked on his bread. The other employees, the gardener, the cleaners, the security guard, all stopped breathing. "Rose!" Jessica pointed her finger like a weapon. "You're the only one with unrestricted access to her room." "Miss Jessica, I never—" Rose began, but was cut off. "Shut up! Teresa, call everyone. I want every employee of this house here in 5 minutes. Samuel, call Mr. Thomas Green. I want my lawyer present, and call the police." Police? Rose's legs went weak. Obviously. Grand larceny, abuse of trust, embezzlement. You'll rot in jail. Within minutes, the room was packed. 12 employees formed a tense semicircle. Attorney Thomas Green arrived with his leather briefcase, adjusting his expensive glasses. 2 neighborhood security guards were summoned as reinforcements. Even some curious neighbors peeked through the windows. This woman, Jessica circled around Rose like a vulture around carrion, abused this family's trust. She stole an irreplaceable jewel, $120,000. Search everything, Jessica ordered the guards. Her room, every drawer, every corner. While the men went upstairs, Jessica continued the humiliation. She snatched Rose's purse and dumped everything on the floor. A wallet with $15, yellow documents, a drugstore lipstick, blood pressure pills, old photographs. How pathetic. Jessica kicked the items. Look at this, a faded photo. Who's this washed-out woman with you? My mother, Rose replied, tears beginning to fall. She died when I was a teenager. Died of what? Misery. Jessica stepped on the photo. You poor people always have tragic stories. Miss Jessica, Dr. Clark tried to intervene. This is going too far. Doctor, keep your opinion on my mother's health, Jessica snapped. Teresa couldn't take it anymore. Miss Jessica, Rose is honest. 5 years here, not even a spoon has ever gone missing. Teresa, do you want to lose your job too? The threat was enough to silence the cook. The guards came back. We didn't find anything, ma'am. Did you search properly? Did you rip open the mattress, break the wardrobe? Jessica, this is property destruction, the lawyer whispered. Property of a thief. That's when Mrs. Caroline, in her wheelchair, began to shake violently. She tried to speak, but no words came out. Her eyes, usually dull, shone with desperation. Jessica had an idea. That sadistic gleam in her eyes, one all the staff knew and feared. Rose, I'll make you an offer. She stepped closer, her expensive perfume invading the space. A wager. Rose lifted her tear-soaked face. If you prove your innocence in 24 hours, I'll pay you $150,000. Did you hear me? $150,000. Jessica turned to the witnesses. Everyone here heard it. The lawyer tried to interject. Jessica, this could have legal consequences. But, Jessica continued, ignoring him, if you can't prove it by tomorrow at noon, you leave with nothing. $90,000 in back pay I never paid stays with me, and I'll press criminal charges. Gasps filled the room. $90,000, 5 years of unpaid wages? Ma'am, Samuel couldn't hold back. You owe 5 years of wages? That's none of your business, Samuel, Jessica snarled. So, Rose, do you accept or confess to the theft right now? Rose stayed silent. She looked at Mrs. Caroline, still agitated, tears rolling down her wrinkled face. She looked at the staff, all with pity in their eyes. She looked at Jessica, pure arrogance and cruelty distilled into human form. I accept, Rose said, her voice surprisingly firm. Jessica smiled. It was the smile of a snake about to strike. Perfect. It's exactly noon now. She showed her $50,000 watch. Tomorrow, same time. Either you prove your innocence or you're out on the street and then in jail. As everyone dispersed, Rose stayed kneeling by Mrs. Caroline, remembering that strange first day. The elderly woman had been lucid that afternoon. She had gripped Rose's hands with surprising strength and stared into her eyes for long minutes. Miller, Mrs. Caroline had murmured. I once knew a Miller, long ago. A beautiful young woman, She worked as a seamstress. She had eyes like yours. It must be a coincidence, ma'am. No, it's not a coincidence. I feel it. You have something familiar, something in your blood. Rose thought it was just the ramblings of age, but Mrs. Caroline went on. Promise me you won't abandon me. Promise you'll stay, no matter what my daughter does. I promise, ma'am. She doesn't know. Jessica doesn't know anything. I tried to tell her so many times, but the cowardice. Mrs. Caroline began to cry. The secret will die with me. Now, 5 years later, Rose understood there was something much greater at play. Something Mrs. Caroline had desperately tried to reveal, but the stroke had locked inside her mind. Less than 24 hours remained to uncover the truth. Rose went up to her tiny room with trembling legs, but her mind racing at full speed. 24 hours to prove her innocence or lose everything. $90,000 in back pay, her dignity, maybe even her freedom. But there was something more important. Mrs. Caroline. If Rose left, who would care for her with love? Jessica barely touched her own mother, treating her as an expensive burden she was too selfish to discard. The room was minuscule, 10 by 10 feet with a twin bed, a plywood wardrobe, and a small table where Rose kept her most precious treasures. She opened the drawer and pulled out a thick notebook, wrapped in plastic to protect it from time. 5 years of meticulous notes. Every medication given, every crisis, every lucid word from Mrs. Caroline. It was her work diary, but also much more. It was proof of her absolute dedication. She flipped through the pages until she found the 3 dates marked with red stars. May 3rd, 2021, Mrs. Caroline showing signs of pulmonary embolism, bluish lips, oxygen saturation at 82%. Rose called Dr. Clark at 2 in the morning, against Jessica's express orders never to disturb the doctor outside of business hours. She saved the elderly woman's life. September 15th, 2022. Accidental overdose of clonazepam. Jessica had given a double dose by mistake. Rose induced vomiting and kept Mrs. Caroline awake until the ambulance arrived. January 8th, 2024. Choking on a piece of meat. Heimlich maneuver performed successfully. Object expelled after 40 seconds. But there was more in the notebook. Rose had written down every humiliation suffered, every unpaid salary, every broken promise. And more importantly, she had attached receipts, screenshots of messages, even audio recordings discreetly made with her old cell phone. 5 years unconsciously preparing for this moment, as if fate itself knew she would one day need to prove not only her innocence, but all the accumulated suffering. Rose walked downstairs carrying the notebook in a small shoebox. She found Teresa in the kitchen, preparing lunch with her face red from crying. The cook hugged her tightly, the way a mother hugs a wrong daughter. Samuel was there too, pretending to check the car keys, but clearly waiting to offer support. Even the younger maids, Hannah and Claire, had stopped cleaning to form a protective circle around Rose. Rose, we need to talk. Teresa broke the silence, her voice heavy with 20 years of unspoken words. This story about the brooch is a lie. I saw Miss Jessica last night in the office, messing with her mother's jewelry. She was on the phone, talking about debts, about needing quick money. The revelation hit the kitchen like a bomb. Everyone knew. Jessica lived a luxurious life, but no one imagined financial problems. Samuel stepped forward. I have something too. Last month I drove Miss Jessica to the bank. She withdrew $300,000 from her mother's account. Mrs. Caroline doesn't even know. She's incapable of signing. It was forgery. The driver pulled out his phone. I took pictures of the documents when she left them in the car. I thought it was strange, so I kept them just in case. Hannah, the shyest maid, raised her hand like a child asking permission to speak. I found the brooch. Her words made everyone turn to her. It's in the office safe. I saw it yesterday when I was cleaning. She ordered me out in a hurry, but I saw it. The brooch is there, along with other documents. Rose felt her heart race. The puzzle pieces were starting to fit together. Jessica had set it all up. She needed money, maybe to cover debts, and found the perfect scapegoat in the caregiver. But why specifically now? What had changed? There's one more thing, Teresa continued, lowering her voice as if the walls had ears. Mrs. Caroline has moments of lucidity that Jessica doesn't know about. Yesterday at dawn, she called me. She was completely clear, Rose. She asked me to look for a secret drawer in her bedroom. Said there were important documents you needed to see. Rose rushed upstairs to Mrs. Caroline's room, her heart pounding like a war drum. The elderly woman was asleep, sedated from her lunchtime medication. Rose approached the old wardrobe, a mahogany piece that had been in the family for generations. She ran her hands over the wood, searching for what Teresa had described. In the false back of the bottom drawer, her fingers found a small lever. The secret compartment opened with a soft click. Inside was a yellowed envelope and a bundle of letters tied with faded blue ribbon. The envelope bore the shaky handwriting of Mrs. Caroline. For Rose Miller, when the time is right. Rose's hands trembled so much she could barely open it. Inside was a letter written in different moments with different inks, as if Mrs. Caroline had used every window of lucidity in the last 5 years to add lines. My dear Rose, if you are reading this, it means my cowardice has finally been defeated by the truth. You are not a stranger in this house. You are my blood, though not in the way you might think. Your father was my husband, Robert Whitmore. Your mother, Joanna Miller, worked as a seamstress for our family in 1984. Robert fell in love with her. I pretended not to see, as wives of my generation were taught to do. Rose had to sit down. The words swam before her eyes. She kept reading, her world collapsing and rebuilding with every line. When Joanna became pregnant, I had 2 choices: expel her or take in the child. But Robert died in a car accident before you were born. Joanna fled, afraid of my vengeance. I searched for her for years, not to punish her, but to know you. The other daughter of my husband, the sister Jessica, never knew she had. The bundle of letters was even more revealing. Correspondence between Mrs. Caroline and a nun from the orphanage where Rose spent part of her childhood after Joanna's death. Mrs. Caroline had paid for her education anonymously, followed her life from afar, waiting for the right moment to bring her home. When she saw Rose's ad looking for work as a caregiver 5 years earlier, it was as if fate had finally conspired in her favor. I tried to tell Jessica so many times, the letter went on. But she inherited the worst of her father, the pride, the arrogance, the contempt for the weak. Every time she humiliated you, I died inside. But the stroke stole my voice, turned my confession into a prison. Forgive this cowardly old woman. In the safe in my room, code 30-81984, the date your mother entered our lives, is everything you need to know. Rose checked the clock. It was already 5 in the afternoon, 19 hours left. She rushed to the safe hidden behind a painting. Her fingers trembled as she entered the code. Inside, along with jewelry and money, was a sealed envelope from St. Luke's Hospital. Rose recognized the name. It was where she had done a blood test 2 years earlier, when Mrs. Caroline needed a transfusion and she had offered to donate. Before she could open it, the bedroom door flew open. Jessica stormed in like a hurricane, eyes blazing with fury. "What are you doing here? How dare you mess with my mother's things?" She lunged, trying to rip the envelope from Rose's hands, but the caregiver was faster, slipping everything into her uniform. "Give that back now, or I'll call the police," Jessica screamed, her face red with rage. "Breaking and entering, theft, embezzlement, I'll destroy you." But Rose was no longer the same humiliated woman she had been hours earlier. Something had changed. The knowledge of the truth, even partial, had ignited a fire that 5 years of abuse could not extinguish. "Call the police," Rose said calmly. "Call everyone. Let's see who has more to hide here." Rose's tone caught Jessica off guard. The caregiver had always been submissive, always bowed her head. This new Rose, with fire in her eyes and truth in her hands, was unsettling. Jessica stepped back, then regained her composure. "You have until tomorrow at noon, not a minute more. And when you can't prove anything, I'll personally drag you out onto the street and then to the station." She slammed the door so hard the pictures on the wall shook. Rose waited until silence returned to the room. Mrs. Caroline was still asleep but seemed restless, as if battling nightmares. Rose carefully opened the hospital envelope. It was a DNA test, requested by Mrs. Caroline herself 2 years earlier. The result was there. In cold, precise medical terms, probability of first-degree kinship between Rose Miller and Jessica Whitmore, 99.9%. Confirmed paternal half-sisters. The document was signed by 3 different doctors, stamped, notarized. Mrs. Caroline had prepared everything meticulously, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. But the second stroke had stolen her ability to speak clearly, turning truth into an imprisoned secret. Rose stored all the documents in a folder Teresa had brought her. The evidence was complete. The DNA test, Mrs. Caroline's letters, the medical records of saving lives, the recordings of humiliations, the proof that Jessica had forged documents and stolen from her own mother. It was more than enough to turn the tables. But Rose needed to think strategically. Jessica was dangerous when cornered, and there were many millions at stake. Mrs. Caroline's inheritance was estimated at $15 million in real estate, investments, and businesses. If Jessica discovered she had a sister with legal rights, she would be capable of anything. The clock read 8 p.m., 16 hours left. Rose went down to the kitchen, where the staff anxiously awaited her. She showed them part of the documents, keeping the revelation of kinship secret for now. Everyone was shocked by the evidence against Jessica, but also relieved that Rose had ammunition to defend herself. They agreed to stay alert through the night. Any suspicious movement would be reported. Teresa prepared a hearty dinner, insisting that Rose needed strength for the battle ahead. Dawn came with palpable tension in the Whitmore mansion. Rose had not slept, spending the night methodically organizing each document, each piece of evidence, preparing the presentation that would change everything. It was 9 in the morning when Jessica descended the marble stairs, dressed in a blood-red outfit that cost more than Rose would earn in 3 years, if she ever received the back pay. Attorney Thomas Green was already in the room, along with 2 police officers Jessica had called to ensure Rose's eviction and arrest at noon. All 12 staff members were once again summoned to the main hall. Mrs. Caroline was brought in her wheelchair by Dr. Clark, who had been called in to sedate her if she became too agitated. The elderly woman looked different that morning. Her usually dull eyes gleamed with a clarity no one had seen in months. Jessica noticed but ignored it, too focused on her theater of vengeance. "Well, Rose," Jessica began, theatrically checking her $50,000 watch, "you have 3 hours left to prove your innocence. Where's the evidence?" Her voice dripped with sarcasm, the certainty of someone who already considered herself victorious. Rose stood from the corner where she had been sitting, carrying a thick folder. She walked to the center of the room with a dignity that 5 years of humiliation had failed to break. "I have all the necessary evidence, Miss Jessica. But before I show proof about the brooch, I need to clarify some truths you've been hiding." Rose opened the folder and first pulled out the photograph Samuel had taken. "These are bank documents showing you withdrew $300,000 from Mrs. Caroline's account last month, forging her signature." Gasps of surprise rippled through the room. Jessica turned pale. "This is invasion of privacy. How dare you?" Rose didn't let her finish, pulling out more papers. "Here are receipts of your gambling debts, Miss Jessica. $500,000 in online casinos. That's why you needed to frame someone for the missing brooch, so you'd have an excuse to sell your mother's jewels." The silence in the room was absolute. Even the police exchanged uncomfortable glances. Attorney Thomas Green began to sweat, realizing the situation had shifted drastically. But Rose was only getting started. She pulled out her notebook, 5 years of meticulous records. "Here are documented the 3 times I saved Mrs. Caroline's life. Pulmonary embolism in May 2021, accidental medication overdose in September 2022, choking incident in January 2024. Each time, you were absent, traveling, at parties, abandoning your mother to the care of an employee you humiliated daily." That was when something extraordinary happened. Mrs. Caroline raised her trembling hand, her lips moving with effort. Everyone turned to her, and what came out was a voice clearer than it had been in years. "Enough, Jessica! Enough with the lies!" The entire room held its breath. Mrs. Caroline was lucid, completely lucid, as if a divine force had blown away the mental fog. "Mom?" Jessica took a step toward the wheelchair, but Mrs. Caroline raised her hand again, ordering her to stop. "Do not come closer. You've spent 5 years torturing your own sister." The bomb detonated in the silence of the room. Jessica staggered as if she had been punched. The employees looked at one another in shock. The officers lowered the hands they'd kept near their handcuffs. "What are you talking about?" Jessica tried to laugh, but it came out like a croak. "You're delirious, Mom. Dr. Clark, she needs a sedative." But Mrs. Caroline went on, each word carrying the force of decades of kept secrets. "Rose is your sister, Jessica. Your father's daughter with Joanna Miller. I've known all along. I followed her life from afar, paid for her schooling anonymously, waited for the right moment to bring her home. When she showed up looking for a job 5 years ago, it was as if God finally answered my prayers." Rose pulled out the hospital envelope, the DNA test trembling in her hands. "Here's the scientific confirmation. Test done 2 years ago when I donated blood for Mrs. Caroline. 99.9% genetic compatibility. We're paternal half-sisters, Jessica." She held out the document so everyone could see the official stamps, the signatures of 3 physicians, the notarization. Jessica yanked the paper from Rose's hands, her eyes racing over the lines, searching for an error, some forgery. But it was real. Terribly real. Her face went from red to white, then to a sickly gray. "No, this doesn't. You set this up. You faked it. Mom, you've lost your mind." Mrs. Caroline gestured for Rose to continue. The caregiver, now revealed as a rightful heir, took more documents from the folder. Here's the original birth certificate listing Robert Whitmore as the father. Here's the orphanage record from when I spent part of my childhood after my mother died, with notes about Mrs. Caroline's anonymous payments for my education. Each document was a stone thrown at the arrogant fortress Jessica had built. And here, Rose took out the final document. Her voice, now weighted with 5 years of swallowed pain, is Mrs. Caroline's updated will, filed 3 years ago, splitting the estate equally between Robert Whitmore's 2 daughters. Attorney Thomas Green took the document with trembling hands, examined the seals, the signatures, everything perfectly legal and irrefutable. "This means," he said, his voice cracking, "that Ms. Rose is entitled to half of everything. $7.5 million. Jessica collapsed into the nearest armchair. Her legs would no longer hold her. 5 years. For 5 years she had humiliated, psychologically tortured, and exploited her own sister. Each insult, each unpaid wage, each plate of food denied now returned like a tsunami of guilt and horror. "No!" Jessica sprang up in a frenzy, grabbing the documents and trying to tear them. "This isn't happening. I'm the only daughter, the only heir. That nobody is not stealing what's mine." But the officers intervened, stopping her before she could destroy the evidence. One of them, the older one, looked at Rose with respect. "Ma'am, it looks like the person being robbed here was you. 5 years of unpaid labor amounts to forced labor." Teresa could no longer hold back, tears running down her lined face. "5 years, Miss Jessica. 5 years you treated your own sister like trash. So many times I wanted to tell, but Mrs. Caroline made me swear to keep the secret." Samuel spoke too, his voice thick. "Rose saved your mother's life 3 times while you blew fortunes on online casinos. She's been more of a daughter to Mrs. Caroline than you ever were." Jessica looked around like a cornered animal. Everything was collapsing. Her fortune would be split. Her reputation was ruined. The staff she had terrorized now stared at her with open contempt. Worse, she had to face the fact that she had spent 5 years torturing the only blood family she had besides her mother. "The brooch," Rose said calmly, "is in the safe in your office, Miss Jessica. Hannah saw it while cleaning. You staged all of this to have an excuse to throw me out and sell your mother's jewelry to cover your gambling debts." Hannah nodded, finally finding the courage to speak. "It's true. I saw the brooch yesterday. It's there, along with other sale documents you were preparing." Mrs. Caroline raised her hand once more, asking for silence. Her voice, though tired, carried maternal authority. "Jessica, you became exactly what I feared most. You inherited the worst of your father: arrogance, cruelty, contempt for the weak. For 5 years I watched you destroy, day after day, the only person who truly cared for me. Rose never knew she was your sister, yet she cared for me with a love that you, knowing I am your mother, never showed." The silence that followed Mrs. Caroline's words was heavy as lead. Jessica knelt on the floor, documents scattered around her like autumn leaves, each paper an irrefutable proof of her cruelty and lies. The clock read 11:45 a.m. 15 minutes remained until the deadline she herself had set, but now it was she who stood judged before everyone. "Saved," Caroline continued, her voice gaining strength with each word as if years of forced silence were finally finding release. "Jessica, you have a choice now. You can keep denying the truth, try to fight in court, spend what's left of our money on lawyers, and live the rest of your life consumed by hate. Or you can accept Rose as your sister, ask forgiveness for 5 years of torture, and try to build something new from the ruins you created. Jessica lifted her mascara-streaked face, looking from her mother to Rose and back again. Now, like a veil ripped from her eyes, she saw the similarities that had always been there. The shape of the face, the curve of the nose, especially the brown eyes with golden flecks, the unmistakable legacy of Robert Whitmore. How had she been so blind? How had hatred and arrogance clouded her perception so completely? Jessica began, her voice hoarse and broken. She stood slowly, her legs still shaky, and walked over to Rose. Everyone in the room held their breath. I destroyed you for 5 years. I called you a parasite while you were saving my mother. I denied you food while you stayed up nights caring for her. I withheld $90,000 in wages while I blew $500,000 on gambling. Each confession came out as if tearing pieces from her soul. Rose stood still, the documents still in her hands, watching the woman who had been her tormentor fall apart before everyone. There was no pleasure in seeing Jessica like this, only a deep sadness for the time lost, the needless suffering, and what could have been if the truth had been revealed earlier. Jessica pulled her phone from her pocket with trembling hands and called her bank manager. Mark, I need to make an urgent transfer. $3 million to Rose Miller's account. Yes, you heard me. $3 million. Gasps rippled through the room. It was far more than Rose would receive even with the inheritance split. It's the least I can do, Jessica went on, still on the phone, for 5 years of forced labor, for the emotional damage, for the suffering I caused. She hung up and looked at Rose. The money will be in your account within an hour. Attorney Thomas Green approached with documents. I'll prepare the formal acknowledgement of paternity and the equal division of assets. Ms. Rose, you'll also be entitled to be appointed Mrs. Caroline's legal conservator since you're the one who has cared for her all these years. Rose nodded, still processing how quickly her life had changed. In 24 hours, she had gone from a humiliated caregiver to a millionaire heir, from a solitary orphan to a woman with a family. 6 months had passed since that revealing morning. The Whitmore mansion had undergone profound transformations, not just physical, but spiritual. Rose had taken over management of the house and the family's businesses, showing a natural competence that surprised everyone. The employees, once terrorized, now worked with joy. Teresa sang in the kitchen, Samuel whistled as he drove, the housekeepers chatted freely in the halls. Jessica had voluntarily checked into a rehabilitation clinic to treat her gambling addiction. In the first week, she resisted, denied, rebelled. But little by little, stripped of her armor of arrogance, she began to see the emptiness she had tried to fill with bets and cruelty. She wrote weekly letters to Rose, at first only reporting on treatment, then beginning to share childhood memories, fears, regrets. With proper care, and above all the peace of seeing her daughters finally reunited, Mrs. Caroline improved remarkably. She still had limitations from the stroke, but she could communicate better and even take a few steps with help. She spent afternoons in the garden, Rose on one side, and, once Jessica was allowed visits, on the other. 3 women bound by blood and by pain transformed into understanding. On a sunny afternoon in December, the 3 were on the porch when Jessica finally managed to say the words that had been stuck in her throat for months. Rose, I called you a parasite, but the parasite was me. I was draining life from everyone around me, especially yours. You could have destroyed me with those proofs, could have sued me and left me with nothing. But you chose to give me a chance to be your sister. I don't deserve it, but I swear I'll spend the rest of my life trying to." Rose took Jessica's hand, feeling the calluses that volunteer work at the clinic had created, so different from the soft, cruel hands of before. "We lost 40 years not knowing we were sisters, and 5 years with you torturing me without knowing. We can't change the past, Jessica, but we can choose the future. I choose to have a sister." Mrs. Caroline smiled, the smile that had been trapped for years behind the mask of the stroke. Her daughters were finally together, not as boss and employee, not as tormentor and victim, but as family. The blood Jessica had despised when she thought Rose was just a poor maid was the same blood that now bound them with unbreakable ties. The mansion that had been the stage for so much humiliation and suffering now echoed with genuine conversations, true laughter, and, most importantly, love between sisters whom fate separated at birth, life kept close in pain, and truth finally united in redemption. The emerald brooch was found exactly where Hannah had said, in Jessica's safe. Rose returned it to Mrs. Caroline, who held it to her chest and said, "This brooch belonged to my grandmother, a woman who also hid secrets for fear of social judgment. Now it will belong to my 2 daughters, so they'll always remember that the truth, no matter how painful, is better than a life of lies." And so, in a twist none of the 12 employees present that day could have imagined, the woman who had entered that house as a humble caregiver, accused of theft and nearly sent to jail for a crime she didn't commit, became not only a millionaire, but something far more valuable. She became family. The blood she never knew she shared proved stronger than 5 years of humiliation, and the love she had always shown Mrs. Caroline, even without knowing she was caring for her sister's mother, proved that family isn't only about DNA, but about choosing love even when the world gives you every reason to hate.